22 years of marriage, and Linda walked away with everything she could carry, everything she could photograph for the attorneys, everything she could point to and say, "That's mine now." The house in Germantown, the joint savings, the retirement split, my 2019 F-150. Actually, she left me that, which was either generosity or oversight. And knowing Linda, I'm going with oversight. And Biscuit. She took Biscuit. She left me a cardboard box. The box sat in the corner of my new apartment on Poplar Avenue for 3 months. Not because I was avoiding it, because I had other things to mourn first. The house, the marriage, the specific sound of a quiet Sunday morning that I hadn't appreciated for 2 decades and now understood, too late, was the sound of a life I'd built and let someone else dismantle piece by piece in a conference room downtown. The box was labeled Frank's Old Junk in Linda's handwriting, which was, in retrospect, the most expensive piece of inaccurate labeling in the state of Tennessee. My name is Frank Deller, 55 years old, commercial insurance broker, 17 years in the business, operating out of Memphis, Tennessee since 2007. I grew up in Midtown, went to school at the University of Memphis, spent 12 years at Consolidated Risk Partners before the divorce convinced me it was time to move. I am not a man who makes speeches. I'm not a man who posts things on social media. I'm the man who shows up, shakes your hand, remembers your wife's name and your dog's name, and the fact that you like the Titans even though you live in Memphis. And make sure your business is covered in a way that doesn't let you down at 2 in the morning when the call comes. That is not a job description. That's 17 years of relationship work. And Linda's attorneys valued it at 0, which is fine. You don't have to know what something is worth to hand it to the person who built it. The divorce finalized on November 14th. By February 3rd, I'd spent 81 days in a 2-bedroom apartment on Poplar Avenue that smelled like fresh paint and someone else's decisions. My neighbor played acoustic guitar badly every evening around 7. My kitchen window faced a parking garage. I had a coffee maker, a couch I'd bought at the Restoration Hardware clearance sale because old habits, and a box of business cards sitting in the corner of the 2nd bedroom like a patient old friend who wasn't in a hurry. Monday morning, 9:22 a.m. I woke up early because I always wake up early. 30 years of 7 o'clock meetings will recalibrate your biology permanently, and I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window looking at the parking garage and thought, today's the day. No particular reason, no deadline, just the specific internal shift of a man who has finished mourning and is ready to do the next thing. I took the box to the kitchen table, cut the tape with a steak knife because I didn't own a box cutter yet. Opened it. Old conference lanyards, a coffee mug from a risk management seminar in 2018, 3 phone charger cables that fit phones I no longer owned, a framed photo of me and my college roommate Danny Cole at a Grizzlies game that Linda had apparently decided wasn't worth keeping in the divorce but also wasn't worth throwing away, because Linda's particular brand of cruelty was always calibrated to be deniable. And at the bottom, my father's card file, a worn brown leather card organizer, the kind that used to sit on every desk in America in the 1990s before everything went digital. My father had given it to me when I started at Consolidated Risk in 2007. Keep your cards in here. He said the digital stuff disappears. Paper remembers. He wasn't a sentimental man, my father. He was a machinist from South Memphis who read the newspaper front to back every morning and believed that the only things worth keeping were the things that had already proven they could last. He died in March of 2002, 8 months before Linda filed for divorce, and I missed him every day in the specific way you miss someone who would have known exactly what to say about the situation you're in. I opened the card file, 340 business cards, organized alphabetically by client last name. Every major account I'd built at Consolidated Risk since 2007. Regional manufacturing companies, mid-sized distributors, 3 hospital systems, a regional bank holding company, a family-owned trucking operation with 11 locations across 4 states, 17 years of handshakes and remembered birthdays and funerals I attended, and hospital visits I made and phone calls at odd hours that I always picked up because that is what you do when someone trusts you with the thing that keeps their business running. Linda's attorneys had asked me to list my assets. I listed my bank accounts, my retirement, my vehicle, my personal property. Nobody asked about the cards. Nobody asked about the relationships. Nobody asked what it was worth when 340 clients called me by my first name and meant it. I went through every card, one by one, at that kitchen table with my second cup of coffee. I started making a list on a legal pad. Columns: client name, annual premium, years of relationship, last contact date, likelihood of following. I've been doing this kind of analysis for 17 years. I knew my book the way a rancher knows his land. Every corner, every fence line, every place where the ground went soft. By noon, I had my answer. 340 clients, 287 still active with consolidated risk. Approximate total annual premium on accounts I'd personally built and managed. $4.7 million. Percentage of those clients who had followed me when I'd changed firms once before. In 2012, 83%. Linda's attorneys had taken 22 years of visible assets and left me 22 years of invisible ones. I sat at that kitchen table with my legal pad and my father's card file, and I felt for the first time since November 14th, completely calm. I didn't know yet that I was about to make the single most important phone call of my professional life. I didn't know yet that Mike Grasso had been waiting 6 years for me to make it, and I absolutely did not know yet that Biscuit, the 8-year-old beagle Linda had taken in the settlement, was going to be living in my apartment by April because Linda's new building on Union Avenue had a no-pets policy. She had apparently not read before signing the lease. Some things work out. Mike Grasso and I had been friends since 2009, when we'd competed on opposite sides of a bid for a regional logistics account and ended up sharing a table at the industry dinner afterward, and discovered we had identical opinions on the Memphis Grizzlies, expense account lunches, and what makes a client relationship actually last. He'd been senior partner at Sterling Risk Group since 2018. Sterling was a regional firm, East Memphis office on Poplar, strong in mid-market commercial, the kind of shop that grew by hiring people who brought their books with them because they had the sense to hire people worth bringing. Mike had tried to recruit me 4 times, 2017, 2019, 2021, once more in January of 2023, 3 months before Linda filed when I'd been in no position to think about a career move. I called him on a Monday afternoon. His assistant, a woman named Carol who had worked the Sterling front desk for 11 years and had the particular efficiency of someone who has screened calls for a very long time, picked up on the second ring. Sterling Risk, Frank Deller calling for Mike Grasso. 1 moment, Mr. Deller. 3 seconds. Then Mike's voice, and I could tell from the first syllable that he'd been hoping for this call. Frank Deller. Tell me you're calling about what I think you're calling about. I'm ready. And I brought the book. A pause, then the sound of a man leaning back in his chair. How big? 4.7 in annual premium. I'd estimate 80 to 85% follow rate based on the last transition. Another pause. Longer this time. The pause of a man running a calculation. Frank. I'm going to need you to come in, today if you can. I can be there at 3. I'll clear my afternoon. Welcome back to Sweet Family Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. Sterling Risk Group's East Memphis office occupied the top 2 floors of a building on Poplar Avenue, about 14 blocks from my apartment. I had driven past it approximately 300 times in the previous 81 days without once thinking about walking in, which tells you something about the specific paralysis of a man in the middle of a divorce. You stop being able to see the things that were available to you all along. Mike met me in the lobby. He's 53, built like a former college wrestler who decided the gym was worth keeping even when the career ended, with the kind of handshake that communicates exactly what kind of man he is before a word gets spoken. He shook my hand, looked at me directly, and said, "You look terrible. 81 days on Poplar Avenue will do that. We're going to fix that." He gestured toward the elevator. "Come on. I want you to meet the team." The meeting lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. Mike, his 2 other senior partners, a quiet, precise woman named Janet Bowman, who handled the numbers, and a third-generation Memphis insurance man named Roy Webb, who knew the regional market the way I knew my client file, and me, with my legal pad and my father's card file, and 17 years of relationship data that I had kept because my father told me paper remembers. Roy looked at the card file and said what everyone in the industry eventually says when they see a real book managed by a real broker. "That's not a job. That's a business." "That's what I've been trying to explain," I said, mostly to divorce attorneys who didn't understand the difference. Janet laid out the structure over the next 40 minutes. Guaranteed base, above-market commission on all transferred accounts, an equity stake in the firm that vested over 3 years, and a performance bonus tied to net new premium in year 1. The total value of the package, including the equity stake at current firm valuation, was considerably more than the joint savings account Linda had split 60-40 in her favor. I signed the offer letter on Wednesday, February 5th. I didn't know yet that the alimony calculation based on my consolidated risk salary, a salary that was about to become permanently irrelevant, was going to create a legal situation that Linda had not anticipated. I didn't know yet that the modification filing would arrive on her attorney's desk with the specific surgical force of a man who had spent 17 years making sure the paperwork was always correct. I knew one thing. The cards my father gave me in 2007, the ones Linda called junk and packed in a box and left in my corner, were about to do exactly what paper always does. They were going to remember. There is a specific, quiet joy in doing the work you know how to do after a long period of not being able to do anything. The divorce had lasted 14 months. 14 months of attorneys and mediators and asset lists and conference rooms that smelled like recycled air and anxiety. 14 months of watching a woman I'd built a life with treat that life like an inventory to be divided. And then it was over, and I had 81 days of nothing, and then I had a card file and a phone and a list. Wednesday, February 5th, 2 days after I opened the box. The sterling offer letter was signed and in my jacket pocket. I sat at the kitchen table at 7 a.m. because 30 years of early meetings, because the parking garage outside my window had already been awake for an hour, because some habits are worth keeping, and I opened the card file to the first card. Roger Abernathy, president of Abernathy Brothers Manufacturing, Memphis, Tennessee. Client since 2009. Annual premium on his commercial property and liability package, approximately $127,000. Years of relationship, 15. Last lunch, October 2023, at Elfo's on South Main, where he'd told me about his grandson starting Little League, and I'd told him about the Grizzlies center's ankle, and we'd talked about his coverage limits for about 12 minutes out of an hour and a half. That's what nobody outside the industry understands about a real book of business. The coverage conversation is a fraction of the relationship. The relationship is what you're actually selling. The coverage is just the document that proves you showed up. I called Roger at 8:45, Frank Deller. I was wondering when you'd call. Which is how you know a client relationship is real. He'd been wondering. I wanted to let you know I've made a move. Sterling risk, effective immediately. I wanted you to hear it from me before you heard it anywhere else. A pause. Sterling Mike Grasso's outfit. That's the one. You taking your accounts? I'm calling clients I've worked with and letting them know where I landed. What they do from there is their call. Roger laughed, the specific laugh of a man who has been in business long enough to appreciate the way a well-constructed sentence can say several things at once. Frank, I've been with you since Obama's first term. You think I'm staying at Consolidated because of the wallpaper? I think you should make whatever decision is best for your company. My decision is that my broker is at Sterling now. When do you want to do the transfer paperwork? I can have Janet Bowman reach out this week. Tell her to call Carol. Carol handles my calendar. Roger Abernathy was the first call. He was not the last. I want to tell you about the calls, because the calls are the story, not the legal filings. Those come later, and they arrive with the efficiency of a man who spent 17 years making sure every document was correct. The calls are where the 17 years actually lived. I called 43 clients over the course of 16 days. I made a call every morning at 8:45, because 8:45 is after the first coffee but before the first meeting, and clients in the commercial space pick up at 8:45 because they're at their desks and not yet buried. I went alphabetically through the card file. I did not pitch. I did not sell. I introduced myself exactly as I was. Frank Deller, formerly of Consolidated Risk, now at Sterling Risk Group, and I told each client that I wanted them to know where I'd landed before they heard it from anyone else. Every single call followed the same emotional arc: recognition, warmth, the specific unhurried tone of a business relationship that has been built over years and is therefore not in a hurry about anything. And then, without exception, the question, "Are you taking your accounts?" And every single time, I gave the same answer. I'm letting people know where I am. What they do is their choice. And every single time, the client made the same choice. 38 out of 43. 88% follow rate. Linda's attorneys had valued my professional relationships at zero. The market had a different opinion. Janet Bowman was the most organized person I had met since my father, which is a high bar because my father filed his tax returns in January. She had the transfer paperwork for every following account processed within 3 business days of the initial call. She moved with the quiet, devastating efficiency of someone who understood that the longer you gave clients to reconsider, the more opportunities there were for Consolidated Risk's retention team to call and offer a discount. Speed was the strategy. Janet's speed was extraordinary. By February 21st, 16 days after I signed the offer letter, 38 accounts had formally transferred to Sterling Risk. Total annual premium on transferred accounts, approximately $4.1 million. I'd lost 5 accounts to retention efforts, a real estate development company that was deep into a consolidated relationship that predated me, and 4 smaller accounts where the decision maker had changed since my last contact and the new person didn't have the relationship history. 88%. Mike called me into his office on Friday afternoon, February 21st. Frank, you want to know what your book transferred at? I have a rough number. 412. That's the first-year premium projection on the transferred accounts. He leaned forward slightly. That's a 7-figure book by any measurement in this market. Janet's already projecting an 8-figure book by year 3, based on renewal and cross-sell potential. A pause. The equity stake we gave you, it just appreciated. I figured it might. You're not surprised, Mike. I've been managing that book for 17 years. I knew what it was worth. He looked at me for a moment, the look of a man who had recruited me 4 times and was now doing the math on how much money he'd missed by not getting the yes sooner. Linda's attorneys really left the card file on the table. They called it junk. He shook his head slowly. 17 years of relationship capital, and they called it junk. Linda's handwriting. Her exact word. A pause. Did you correct them? If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So, thank you for real. I want to tell you about the alimony calculation, because this is where the story moves from professional satisfaction into something that Linda's attorney probably still thinks about. The alimony order, signed by the family court judge in November, based on the income figures both parties had submitted during the proceedings, was calculated on my base salary at Consolidated Risk. That salary was real. It was also, as of February 5th, my former salary. My new compensation structure at Sterling included a smaller guarantee base, a significantly higher commission rate on the transferred book, and an equity stake in the firm. In the first 12 months at Sterling, my total compensation, base plus commission on the transferred book plus year 1 performance bonus, was 2.5 times my former salary at Consolidated. The alimony order was based on a number that no longer existed. Now, and this is important, I did not conceal this. I did not hide it. I did not structure the Sterling deal to specifically undermine the alimony calculation, though I will not pretend the thought didn't cross my mind in about 45 seconds, and then get filed under Do Not Do That. What I did was exactly what the law required. I disclosed the new compensation structure to my attorney, who filed the appropriate notification with the court. The notification that my income had changed, specifically that it had more than doubled, triggered a modification review under Tennessee law. Linda's attorney's response arrived on my attorney's desk in early March. I wasn't there for the call, but my attorney, a precise, unbothered man named Greg Potts, who charged $400 an hour and was worth every dollar, described it to me later as the sound of someone realizing they undervalued the wrong asset. The modification proceeding was, in the words of Greg Potts, straightforward but not in the direction Linda expected. I didn't know yet what the modification review was going to produce. I didn't know yet that the asset Linda's attorneys had dismissed as a cardboard box of old junk was about to be formally valued in a family court filing for the first time. And I absolutely did not know yet that Biscuit was coming home. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Justice, in my experience, doesn't arrive with a thunderclap. It doesn't make a speech. It doesn't post anything. It shows up the way a good broker shows up, quietly, with the paperwork in order, at the precise moment when the other party realizes they should have asked a better question 6 months ago. Monday, March 3rd, Greg Potts called at 9 a.m., Frank, the modification review is moving. Linda's attorney filed a response last week. What's their position? Their position is that the income increase was manufactured, that you structured the Sterling deal specifically to inflate your compensation and trigger a modification. Can they prove that? A pause. No, because it's not true, and the Sterling offer letter is dated February 5th, 2 days after you open the box. There's no evidence of prearrangement. The timeline is clean. It is clean because it is clean. I know. I'm telling you their theory so you understand what we're going to be dealing with in the review hearing. What's the hearing date? April 3rd. What do we need? The Sterling offer letter, your compensation structure documentation, a professional opinion on the value of your book of business at the time of the original settlement, specifically what a qualified valuator would have assessed your client relationships at if anyone had asked during the original proceedings. I was quiet for a moment. You want to put a number on what they missed. I want the court to see what they missed, Greg said. There's a difference. The professional valuation of a commercial insurance book of business is not a simple calculation. It involves premium revenue, client retention history, relationship tenure, the broker's professional reputation, and several other factors that collectively determine what a prospective buyer, say a firm like Sterling, would pay to acquire the book in an arm's-length transaction. Industry standard for a well-managed commercial book runs between 1 and 2 times annual revenue, depending on client quality and retention history. My book, at the time of the divorce settlement in November, had been generating approximately $4.7 million in annual premium. At the low end of industry valuation, 1 times revenue, the book was worth $4.7 million. Linda's attorneys had listed it as 0. The difference between 0 and 4.7 million was the number Greg Potts was going to put in front of the modification hearing judge on April 3rd, not to reopen the settlement. That was not the argument. The argument was simpler and more devastating. The original income assessment used to calculate alimony had been made without any consideration of the primary professional asset that drove that income. The income would have been different if the asset had been properly valued. The alimony calculation should reflect the actual income capacity, not the artificially constrained salary figure from a job Frank Deller no longer held. The valuation expert Greg brought in was a woman named Dr. Patricia Cole, a CPA and certified business valuator who testified in family court proceedings across the Southeast. She reviewed my production records, my client retention history, and the Sterling offer letter. She submitted a written opinion. The book of business held by Frank Deller at the time of the November divorce settlement had a fair market value of between $4.2 and $4.9 million. It had not been disclosed as a marital asset because it had not been identified as an asset at all. It had been identified as a box of business cards. Patricia Cole's written opinion used the word oversight 4 times in 12 pages. She was being generous. The word Linda's attorney used in his response to Greg was irrelevant. He was being optimistic. The hearing was on a Thursday morning in April 3rd. Family Court, downtown Memphis. Greg Potts arrived with the valuation report, the Sterling offer letter, the compensation documentation, and 17 years of production records from Consolidated Risk. Linda's attorney arrived with the argument that Frank Deller had engineered his own income increase to game the modification system. The judge reviewed both positions for 47 minutes. Then she said 5 sentences. The income modification was appropriate given the documented increase in total compensation. The original alimony calculation had been based on salary information that did not reflect the income-generating capacity of the primary professional asset. The modification would reflect the new compensation structure. The original settlement was not subject to reopening on grounds of undisclosed assets because no fraud had been established. And the court noted for the record that both parties' attorneys bore responsibility for ensuring comprehensive financial disclosure during the original proceedings. That last sentence was addressed to the room generally. But Linda's attorney was the only person in the room whose face changed color when it was delivered. Greg Potts said afterward, in the parking garage in a voice that was about as close to gleeful as a $400 an hour attorney ever gets, Patricia Cole's opinion is now part of the permanent court record. Every time Linda's attorney files anything in this jurisdiction, that opinion is in the file. What does that mean practically? It means the next time Linda tries to modify anything, alimony, property, anything, every judge in this building knows what her attorney missed the first time. A pause. It's not a penalty. It's just a permanent note in the margin. A permanent note in the margin, I repeated. The most expensive kind. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you, genuinely. I want to tell you about Biscuit. Because the story doesn't end in a courthouse. The story ends on a Tuesday evening in April, at my apartment on Poplar Avenue, when my phone rang and it was Linda. I will tell you that I did not expect the call, and I will tell you that I answered it because the one thing I had committed to in the months since November was not making things worse by being petty, which is a harder commitment to keep than it sounds when the person calling you is the woman who packed your life in boxes and called the most valuable part of it junk. Frank, Linda, a pause. The pause of a woman who has prepared what she wants to say and is now recalculating whether she prepared correctly. The new building on Union. They have a no pets policy. I saw something about Union Avenue. Nice building. I didn't read the policy before I signed the lease. Another pause. Biscuit can't stay here. I looked at the kitchen window, the parking garage, the particular quality of April evening light that makes even a parking garage look almost reasonable. When do you need me to take him? This weekend. If you can. I can. She was quiet for a moment. Frank, the court thing. Linda. Let's not. I just want to. Linda. Send me the address. I'll pick up Biscuit Saturday morning. She sent the address. I picked up Biscuit on Saturday, April 12th, at 9 a.m. from the front desk of Linda's new building on Union Avenue. He was in his carrier with his food, his bed, and the squeaky chicken toy that he had owned since 2019 and refused to give up despite the fact that it had long since lost its squeak. The woman at the front desk, who had absolutely no idea what she was witnessing, handed me the carrier and said, "He's been very patient. He's a sweet dog. He always has been." I drove home to Poplar Avenue with Biscuit in the passenger seat, which is where he had always ridden for 8 years, and did not need to be told was still his spot. He sat up straight and looked out the windshield at Memphis going past. East Memphis, Midtown, the building on Poplar with the parking garage view. I carried him upstairs, set the carrier on the kitchen floor, opened the door. He walked out, went directly to the corner of the kitchen near the window, turned around twice and lay down. The way a dog lies down in a place he has decided is fine. Not excited, not uncertain, just settled. "Yeah," I said. "That's about right." Here is what Linda took. The house in Germantown. The joint savings, 60-40. Half the retirement. 22 years of the life we'd built together in all the ways it can be photographed and itemized and divided in a conference room by people charging by the hour. Here is what Linda left. A cardboard box labeled Frank's Old Junk, containing my father's card file, and 340 business cards representing $4.7 million in annual premium that her attorneys never asked about because they looked at a warm leather card organizer and saw nothing worth the question. Here is what happened in the 6 months that followed. I joined Sterling Risk Group with an equity stake in a commission structure that more than doubled my income. 38 of 43 clients followed me. The modification hearing established a new alimony calculation based on actual income capacity. The valuation that should have been done during the original proceedings became a permanent part of the court record, and Biscuit came home. I kept the card file on my desk at Sterling. My father's card file, the worn brown leather one he gave me in 2007 when he said paper remembers. I added a few cards to it after the move. New contacts, Sterling referrals. A client I'd gotten through Roy Webb who turned into a $200,000 account in year 1. I thought about Linda every time I opened it. Not with anger. Anger is expensive and I'd spent enough on attorney fees. With something that felt more like clarity. The clarity of a man who understands, with complete precision, the difference between what a thing looks like and what it is actually worth. She saw a box of old junk. I saw 17 years. Paper remembers. My father knew that. I knew that. Linda's attorneys found out the hard way.